and Pam are supposed to be here too.
I'm here representing Les Dames Escoffier, the San Francisco chapter. We are, for those of you who are not members, we are part of an international organization that helps women who are coming into the hospitality industry, food, fine beverage, and hospitality. And the San Francisco chapter has a number of philanthropic funds. It's very exciting to get donations and to be able to give them out and to help young women who are coming into the industry. So we have these postcards that are outside on one of the tables. It takes you to our website to learn more about us. And you can help our chapter in a variety of ways. First of all, if you are experienced in the food industry and thinking about joining as a member, our membership application is going to open up within the next week or so, and that information is on our website. If you're not in the industry and would like to help, we have a donation button on our website, and you can donate to any one of our philanthropic funds. And I'm excited to announce we're going to have the second annual culinary rummage sale on July 18th. Ooh. And you can, and usually people can hear me no matter what. And for the rummage sale, you can contribute either by giving us your gently used, wonderful kitchen items to sell to raise money, or by attending it on July 18th, and it'll be a Prospect restaurant. And that information will be on our website as well. So thank you everyone for being here, and I'll be here for the reception if you have any questions. Be sure to find me.
Thank you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Carrie Shelley. I am a Dom. God bless her for taking me. And co-founder of Bay Area Culinary Historians, which spells BACH. There are cards out there. We have Johann Sebastian as our happy logo. I'd like to ask Pam and Lori and Andrew to stand up. These are our leadership team that help put all this together. So we're thankful for that. And just in general, I want to thank Kara and Dom who couldn't be here this evening. And this amazing panel that I think is the giant feather in my cap that I've been able to hold on. Sunset's been a part of my life. This is my mother's menu box. And I pulled it out. And what's on top? Cut out sunset pages. And I think this particular one has a crab cake on one side and oatmeal blueberry pancakes on the other. So I'm just going to assume that she did both. But that's my legacy, was being raised with sunset as part of our household, along with Women's Day, Better Homes and Gardens. And it's just life-changing for someone like me. But I also want to ask people to stand. Susan Wood, Stephanie Levine, Jennifer Pagano, Nancy Ash, Elaine Johnson, Eileen Spitali, Lori Kolstead, Bibi Carmenito, Rachel Nussbaum, and Pam Elder. These people are the ones who contributed our afternoon appetizers. So we want to thank them for our guests that we're going to share We're going to taste things like cabanana, dried tomato torta, and green goddess dip. So that are from one of the books that's wandering around. And last but not least, I have to stand. I want to thank Andy and Becca, my husband and stepdaughter, who have worked tirelessly this past week to help get all this pulled together. When the reception starts out there with the Dom postcard is BACH postcard, so we invite you to join our website for events that we hold monthly. June, the fourth Sunday of June, our biggest dinner event. We're going to be celebrating the 140th anniversary of America's oldest Italian restaurant at Fior d'Italia. and we're serving an 1886 menu. So tickets will go on sale. I'm hoping within the week. And then there's also a postcard out there for morsels. This is an art exhibit of tiny tastes of delectable art. All the art is food themed, under 12 inches at ACCI Gallery on Shattuck and Berkeley, kind of catty corner to Shanice. And this opened last night. So there's some postcards out there. Now, to no further ado, introduce Jennifer, our moderator today. God bless her for this one. Yeah, she got in order. Jennifer brings a unique blend of academic insight and industry to her interest in food history. She holds an MA in Food Studies from the University of the Pacific, where she authored her master's thesis on the evolution of science cooking department. Her research specifically explored how the publication shaped regional cuisine and gender roles during the 1930s. Jennifer has spent most of her career in the food and wine industry, from her start assisting classes at a small cooking school and college to becoming the national director of programs for the American Institute of Wine and Food. She spent more than 2 decades conducting consumer and product research for wine and food industry clients. And currently she is Director of Insight and AI at Matson, a strategy and product development firm. Margo is the former longtime food editor of Sunset Magazine, and all these ladies were editors. We're so lucky. A role she held from 2006 to 2018. Before moving to the West Coast, she honed her expertise as the executive editor of Savour and as senior editor at Gourmet. At Sunset, True dove deep into the locavore movement, notably spearheading a James Beard award-winning staff blog called The One Block Feast, followed by a book of the same name. This project chronicled the staff's ambitious efforts to grow and forage every ingredient for seasonal meals, from raising chickens to harvesting salt. After Sunset, True was the lead writer at Patagonia Provisions, crafting everything from supply chain stories to package copy. A multiple James Beard Award winner, Margo is currently the features editor at Civil Eats. Our superstar, Jerry Vecchio, was a formidable force at Sunset Magazine for more than 40 years, starting as a staff writer in 1959 and retiring as the food and wine editor in 2002. Her influence extended far beyond the page. She was a hands-on explorer who traveled extensively across the West, Mexico, Asia, and Europe to document authentic regional foods and techniques. A pioneer in the New West cuisine, Jerry was instrumental in transitioning the magazine from mid-century casseroles to sophisticated ingredient-driven cooking. She managed the legendary Sunset Test Kitchens, oversaw the magazine's transition into digital media, and authored too many cookbooks to name. Her sharp eye for trends helped popularize everything from the Santa Maria-style barbecue to the widespread use of fresh cilantro, goat cheese, artisan foods, and sustainable farm to table trends in Western homes. Linda Anusasananan.
You're getting close.
I knew I was going to. I tried. Is a celebrated food writer who dedicated 34 years to Sunset Magazine, serving as a vital bridge between Western home cooks and global traditions. While she is an inquisitive student of Asian cuisines, pioneering the landmark 1988 story From China's Kitchens to Ours, her influence spanned the entire breadth of Western lifestyle. From mastering the nuances of bread baking to perfecting the art of the outdoor barbecue, Linda demystified complex techniques for the home kitchen. Author of the acclaimed The Hakka Cookbook, Chinese Soul Food, from around the world, her legacy combines rigorous recipe testing with a passion for East-West flavors, forever shaping the American palate. Elaine Johnson is a nationally recognized food editor and writer who spent over 2 decades shaping the culinary voice of Sunset Magazine. As a senior food editor, she was instrumental in developing the magazine's signature regional fresh style, specializing in outdoor cooking, seasonal produce, baking, and global flavors. Johnson co-edited the award-winning Sunset the Great Outdoors cookbook, was a key contributor to the One Block Feast and blog, and spearheaded the award-winning Camp Sunset project, including co-editing Camp Sunset. Known for her rigorous recipe testing and instructional clarity, she is also a keen visual collaborator. Her work remains a cornerstone of West Coast lifestyle journalism, celebrating the intersection of gardening, outdoor living, and kitchen. Last but not least, Sara Schneider is a distinguished journalist who served as a pivotal leader at Sunset Magazine for over 2 decades. After starting as a copy editor, she rose to become the head of the food department before being named the magazine's first ever wine editor in 2005. A graduate of the California Culinary Academy, Schneider's transformed Sunset's beverage coverage by launching the Sunset International Wine Competition and the Sunset Wine Club. She's widely respected for her expertise in food and wine pairing and her ability to make the West Coast's complex wine culture accessible to home enthusiasts. A multi-time James Beard Award nominee, she also co-authored California Wine Country, a Sunset Field Guide. Thank you all. There will be a Q&A afterwards. We are recording this for posterity. Jennifer, it's all about you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Carrie. So it's been an honor to work with these amazing women. He's coming. Can I just use this? Okay, how's this? Excellent. Okay. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming, and thank you, Carrie and Nancy, for the introductions. It's an honor to be here with this amazing group of people. I grew up in a Sunset family, definitely waiting every month for my dad to build things, my mom to cook things. I grew up on artichoke nibbles. But Sunset was not always what we think of it as this, how-to magazine. It actually started in 1898 as a promotional magazine for the Southern Pacific Railway, and they were promoting their railway route, the Sunset route that went from New Orleans to Monterey. And so the articles were all about all the fantastic things you could do along the way. It also included who was hanging out on the West Coast from the East Coast, so it was kind of a social thing. But eventually people realized that the West was a pretty great place, and so they didn't really need to promote it anymore. So some internal employees that worked on the magazine bought it, and they decided that they were very tired that the people on the East Coast thought everybody on the West Coast just wasn't very sophisticated. So they decided to create a magazine that they thought would be the Atlantic Monthly of the Pacific, and it was for the West Coast intelligentsia. Very interesting articles on politics and all kinds of topics, but it was very much a literary style magazine for the elite. But it didn't do very well either. It was all about subscriptions, and it wasn't doing well financially, and things were changing in the magazine world, and these special interest magazines were becoming much more popular with people, and so it didn't work out. So in comes Lawrence Lane, who came from the Meredith Corporation in Iowa, and he was an ad executive, and he had worked on magazines like Better Homes and Gardens, which was a national, and Successful Farming, which was local. And he really saw in the West this amazing lifestyle and these people who could be outdoors and had wonderful food. He saw the middle class coming up in the world and having more disposable income and time to spend on leisure. So he bought it, and he brought out with him two women, Lou Richardson and Genevieve Callahan, who worked for Meredith, and he brought them out to kind of create this magazine that was going to be readership based. It was going to be for the middle class, and it was going to be this how-to magazine that was going to be about living in the West. So he had pictured a gardening section, a cooking section, a home section, and what am I missing? Travel, and a travel section. And these women were incredible. You know, they edited the magazine to make it a Western magazine. Callahan was a home economist by trade, so she took on the food part and really set the stage for a food department she made the magazine the food department that we know, and that all of these women also contributed to. So, you know, all of them, Callahan up to, Margo, you were the last food editor?
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, so it really shaped Western cooking, Western hospitality, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So there's a lot to talk about, and these guys have so many stories. I mean, we could spend days. We could do a program on each one of them. But I have kind of narrowed it down to 4 topics that we're going to focus on. The first one is all about this idea of Western foodways and this readership magazine that really took most of us, I think, in this room in and kept us, you know, eating and building and gardening throughout and traveling throughout the 20th century. So Callahan introduced Kitchen Cabinet in 1929, which was the year that the first magazine came out. It was purchased in 28. And she had, she was very familiar with this whole idea of having home cooks send in their recipes. You know, it was a way that, you know, they could really create a magazine that was about the reader. She had done this at Butter Homes and Gardens. It was called Cook's Roundtable. And Lawrence Lane's goal was to, again, have this focused magazine. And it was all about how-to. So the early kitchen cabinets actually had this wonderful artist named Ruth White Taylor had created in the sidebars these cartoon strip-like how-tos for some of the recipes, and had, you know, this middle-class woman in her kitchen and serving to her family these recipes. So, you know, the magazine was much more inclusive and practical rather than this kind of dictatorial kind of, it was authoritative, but it wasn't too authoritative. So I'd like to start by delving into how, you know, listening to your readers shaped how you understood and wrote about a Western lifestyle and Western cooking. So I'd like Linda to start. Can you tell us a little bit about your first job at Sunset?
I started in 1971. I was a recent graduate of Oregon State University with home economics and communications. It was 2 years after graduation that I got the lucky call that I got accepted to Sunset Magazine. It's my dream job. One of my first duties was reader service. And that was handling all the inquiries and correspondence from readers. Some of the letters were recipe submissions, like for Kitchen Cabinet or Chefs of the West. I think they got paid $10 if they got the recipe published. Many were requests for recipes that we had previously published. And we had a huge card catalog with all our recipes. We also had binders full of tear sheets of all our past stories. And it was a good way for me to get familiar with what Sunset had previously published, and it was vast. You know, readers wanted to know how to cure the olives on their trees, how to cook in a wok, how to have a nothing to it party. It was a concept that Jerry developed where you didn't have to do too much work. Or what's the best way to barbecue a steak. And then we also got a lot of mail too that always asked, how come my recipe didn't work? Now, with a little probing, if I called them back and I asked them what went wrong and all this other, tell me what happened. And after they told me, I realized, well, the most common reason is they didn't follow the recipe. Oh, I changed a few ingredients. I decided I'd do this and that. So, that was all on them. But there were a few letters that had kind of legitimate complaints that I didn't know the answer to. So I would give the complaint to the person who had created that recipe. And that person would have to go back to their testing notes. And then I began to realize how important this part of the recipe development was. When a writer first creates the recipe, they go in the kitchen and they actually cook the recipe, they take notes, and they have to serve it to all the food staff. And then, we question them, we taste the recipe, and then we say, well, is there an easier way to make this? Or Jerry would always say, can't you use one acid instead of two? Why do we have to use lemon juice and vinegar? We had to make it more concise and easier for the reader to understand. So we would incorporate those changes in, and it would be retested again until it was acceptable. Then the senior editor would go over it for food style and do the final edit, and then our final test, the most important test of all, was with a retester. And retesters were a group of home cooks who came to our kitchens, and their job was to literally cook the recipe following the words as written. Then they would have to serve it to the food staff again. If it was not acceptable, then the writer would have to go back and say, oh, what did I leave out? Sometimes, you cook intuitively, you do something, but you don't write it down. So, well, maybe I forgot to I didn't tell her to cover the pan, or I forgot to rinse the pasta or something. So these changes would all be incorporated into it, and they would have to repeat it until the recipe was acceptable. So that's why, people complain about recipes being long. Our recipes were very detailed, but there's a reason for that. That's to prevent failure. We give pan sizes, we give a doneness test, we give a measurement for how much the ingredient is, or a weight. So that's how Sunset earned the reputation for being super reliable recipes.
Thanks, Linda. Margo, do you have anything to add about Sunset's test kitchen versus all the illustrious test kitchens you've been involved with at Gourmet and Saveur?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say right off the bat, Sunset's recipes were by far the best recipes, the most reliable recipes that I ever had the privilege of working on. And that's also, what Linda was saying about the recipe retesters, one of whom we have in our midst today, Sara. I don't know if she's here. Sara, can you wave? Yeah. She's a longtime Sunset recipe retester. And we just valued them so much. Because not only would the recipe be tested by a retester and then cooked again by us to fix the problems, then it would go to a different retester for the second test using a different stove. If it was electric the first time, then we'd cross-test on gas the second time, just to make sure that this recipe was going to work for most people in most kitchens. And it was just an incredibly valuable piece of how these recipes worked. So at Gourmet, there was a huge staff. There were 7 cooks when I was there. And they were all professionals, highly trained, and they did cross-test, but it was I can just project. Yeah. It was the cooks cross-testing each other. They were testing each other's recipes. So they were all pros. They were fixing things sometimes automatically. Sometimes, the recipes were great and they were delicious. I loved Gourmet's recipes, but there was this sense that the cooks were better than the home cooks, and there was a bit of a sense of when I was there. This changed after I left, but. There was a bit of a sense that that there was this arch kind of, you're in the club of wealth, ladies. You know, it wasn't for the everyday reader, the more middle class reader that Sunset was. So there was a certain exclusivity to it, I would say. And then at Saveur, it was 2 cooks, sometimes 3, but mostly it was 2. And there were no reader recipes per se. The thing about Saveur was that the editors were also often cooks, and the cooks themselves were reporters, and we'd all just fan out into the world and capture these recipes, you know, or collect them, I should say is the better word. And it was more like, yeah, it was landing these recipes as true to their origins as possible. So these ingredients would be very, very specific, you know, barberries or just a specific kind of goat milk cultured in Norway. You know, it was just like, they were really very specific. We would try to give substitutions, but the recipes, when they were brought back, they were tested first by the reporter. Like if I went to Turkey, I'd be back in my home kitchen trying to make the manta, like the little ladies I'd seen, you know, in the factory, going like this, and doing the best I could, interviewing people, and then from there it would go to one of the 3 people in the test kitchen, and they would try to get as close as possible, and we would use the photography that was shot on location to make sure those recipes were matching. I will say that not all the recipes worked. We did as the best that we could, and they were fascinating. They were wonderful experiences, but they were not as reliable as Sunset recipes. So I will say that, you know, and the other thing that was so great about Sunset was that we would share the results of the recipes with the entire staff, and that was lavish testing. As you know, when we did this book, we had a table this size in the test kitchen set up for 3 months, and it was covered with food every day when we made this book. So, to me, Sunset was like it set the bar for recipes that you could rely on and trust.
May I add one thing?
Sure.
First of all, Sunset was geared to a non-professional for sure. Men or women, we had no sexism in our instructions. We expected women to do woodwork, and we expected men to come in and cook. Then we also did travel extensively, as Linda did when she went to China. We brought back authentic recipes, but they had to be edible and they had to be workable. And you had to be able to get the ingredients. Now, we might tell you about the exotic ingredients, but there was always an alternative at the supermarket that would get you through with a decent meal.
Mm-hmm. I would say Saveur also gave alternatives, but you know, even the alternatives were sometimes hard to find.
So Sunset was much more of a middle-class American home cook. And Margo, you also worked on the One Block Feast, which I think is an amazing example of really engaging with your readers. I mean, really engaging with your readers. So I'd love you to tell us more about that project. And not only about the project, but what was rewarding about, from your perspective, about being part of that project?
Okay, I have to put this timer here. I don't want to talk too long. Well, it started really during the height of the locavore movement back in 2008, 2009. And we were getting a lot of queries about local eating. And actually, I'd seen a lot of this at Saveur when I was still in New York, this local eating frenzy. But the stories had a certain sameness to them. And when I came to Sunset and started to appreciate the how-to model and how deeply readers got into creating their own lives in the West, I thought, well, this is a golden opportunity to just cut to the chase and make every ingredient ourselves, was the idea. So literally every ingredient. So we started out by growing all the ingredients we needed for a summer feast. And I brought the magazines with me if anybody wants to look at that story later. It took a year and a half to grow all the ingredients for our first story because And the deal was that there were some ingredients we had to go off campus for that we could not literally grow ourselves. We had olive trees, but they were infested with maggots, for instance. So we had to go to a local olive oil orchard and pick olives. But we crushed them ourselves. We figured out where there was a mill that we could use for small batches, and we met Nancy Ash through our explorations of olive oil. We ended up basically dividing the whole magazine into teams, depending on what the ingredient was. So we had Team Cow. We actually owned a cow for a while and milked her and brought her milk back to the magazine. We had Team Bee. We had bees for honey because we needed some kind of sweetener. We had Team Wine. Sarah was the captain. And we also tried to plant wine grapes, but you know how long it takes. So we did have some sort of white wine grape, I think, in the garden, but it was not going to yield enough for wine. So
I think we had 2 Chardonnay vines.
oh, that was it. Yeah. So for each of these projects, we found some expert advisors. So Sarah located Fogarty vineyards, and they were our teachers, and we made some killer Syrah. We picked their grapes. They advised us, and we made an absolutely delicious Chardonnay. It was really...
We did Chardonnay from their vines, and we did Syrah.
Yeah, they're so wonderful. And we foot crushed them in the driveway. And and we also had a kind of a ancient Italian crusher destemmer thing that we cranked.
Crusher.
So it was super fun. We had all these teams, and took us a year and a half because we had to, produce the olive oil. We had to make vinegar. We had to make salt. We went to a very clean spot of somewhere off the coast and collected, seawater. And anyway, we if anybody is interested, it ended up in a book. So first it was a blog. We all kept this blog of our exploits. We ran a summer story about this with garden plans and everything. And it was such a blast that we decided to keep going. So we grew all the food for a fall, and then winter, and then spring. We had 4 seasonal dinners, all hardcore. We made all the ingredients. And then that turned into a book, and then that didn't seem like enough. So we decided to launch a contest around the West and invited people all across the West to get together with their friends and neighbors and grow their own end of summer block party. And that was the one part that really blew my mind. And this was the reader engagement part. The Sunset Reader went the extra mile. The winning team wanted sugar. They weren't going to settle for honey. So they grew sugar beets. They were in Morro Bay. They grew sugar beets. They didn't know how to make sugar, but they knew it came from beets. Then they found an antique roller mill on eBay. Oh my God. An antique washing machine that had rollers. So they somehow pulped the beets through this roller and then dehydrated the beets and made sugar. And they served pavlovas at their feast with homemade berries. They had bilingual gardens with signage because some of the families were Spanish speaking. It was just the most beautiful thing. But every team, there were 10 teams chosen across the West, they reflected the power of connection to the land. The Colorado team had peaches. They donated to their food bank. The Oakland team was the most beautiful rainbow array of humanity, and they were yanking out monkey-faced eel from the bay, wrapping it up in their grape leaves from their backyards. It was so beautiful. It was so hard to choose the winner. But we finally chose the Morro Bay team. Not only did they get goats for milk and walk them around their neighborhoods on pink leashes, they also galvanized their entire community. This was a senior living place with concrete slab yards. They dug up their concrete slabs, planted gardens, the 8 young families who participated in this project. There were people who hadn't been out of their houses in years who came out to see what was going on. There was, when the team chicken, their team chicken, was harvesting their chickens, it was a bloodbath because they didn't know what they were doing. It was horrible. And their elderly neighbor popped his head above the fence and said, "You boys don't know what you're doing. I grew up on a farm. I'm going to come show you how." And so he did. He did, and then afterward he told them that his children never visited. His wife had died many years before. He had been entirely alone, and he said, this was the most useful I've felt in a decade. And it still makes me a little verklempt.
So that's a reader.
So
that's a reader.
That's a real reader engagement.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I knew this was going to happen. I'm so sorry. But it just goes to show you how dedicated readers were to Sunset, that they would take it and with their own imaginations add to what Sunset was.
Great story. Great story. So let's turn to the outdoors. So before Lawrence Lane bought the magazine, there was a lot of articles about these elite high mountain trips in the Sierras, which is very interesting. To go traveling and camping in the Sierras. I mean, you were either John Muir, who was written up a lot in the magazine, or you had a lot of money and you hired people to bring a stove and cook and lots of mules and stagecoaches and all this stuff. So it was very interesting to understand what mountaineering was before Lawrence Lane. But then as we got into the 20th century, this whole idea of being outdoors kind of became a recreational pursuit. Cars made it possible to get places. You could get to the mountains without having to be on a train or have the money to get in a stagecoach. And so this whole idea of auto camping came to be. And Sunset was there the whole way. So there was a lot of articles. We all know articles about camping and camp food. And I found that really interesting, and so does Elaine. So Elaine, you have a copy of a very special book called The Grub Steak Cookbook. It was written in 1934. Tell us about that book and what was so special about it.
All right, first I'd like to read you a little something from it. Every outfit should be equipped to fry, broil, stew, roast, and bake. Know how to cook and serve grub that is neither messy nor cold. Know how to use your utensils to their utmost advantage. Know how to set a kettle so its chances of spilling are slim. I say, know how and like it. So, Sunset's 1934 Grub Steak Cookbook, written and illustrated by Charles M. Mugler, who was nicknamed Hot Rock, was the magazine's first in a line of outdoor cookbooks that included Sunset's barbecue book in 1938 with a real redwood cover. Just a slight segue, the Library of Congress didn't know what to do with it, so they categorized it under fireplaces. All the way to the Great Outdoors Cookbook that Margo and I co-edited, and then Camp Sunset in 2016 that I worked on. And the early books, as Jennifer was saying, and many of those early camp cooking articles in the magazine, they assumed you were pretty adventurous and you had a pretty good idea of what you were doing. So the Grub Steak Cookbook, which was kind of at that in-between stage, and it's totally adorable, by the way, with all the little illustrations. It shows all kinds of cooking setups because of course this is before you could just go to a hardware store and buy all this outdoor equipment. So there's like a pit lined with hot rocks to a skillet reflector technique where the bread cooks off on one side of the fire. And then recipes are telegraphed in just a few sentences for things like fricassees, biscuits, bear stew. It doesn't tell you how to get the bear, but bear stew. And snow ice cream, which sounds pretty good. It was made with instant coffee, powdered milk, sugar, and snow. Just to step back a brief moment, I wanted to say that the magazine's very first recipes for anything were in one of those Sierra Club articles that Jennifer mentioned. In 1901, there was a piece titled Practical Hints on Camp Cooking, and there were two recipes, one for hash balls of dried potato flakes and canned corned beef, fried in bacon grease, probably pretty good if you've been out all day, and then a stew of just shot grouse. So we'll go forward a few years. By 1959, the magazine had raised the standards for camp food, and a story, The Art of Camp Cookery, included directions for roasting bacon and just caught trout on a stick, and baking a mincemeat port wine pie in a Dutch oven, which is pretty fancy.
Yeah, really.
Glamorous camping, or glamping, was an
There we go, Deb.
Thank you. Glamping was a newly coined term in 2008, and the May magazine cover story that year was for people who love the outdoors but hate camping, and so it promised solutions like swapping your sleeping bag for a feather bed. And this 2015 cover story, the big cover line promise is camping in style, because of course that is your biggest concern when you go camping, that you're going to be really stylish.
So the whole Camp Sunset project, which you mentioned, she showed the book. I mean, you won a Times Henry Luce Literary Award for.
We did.
I mean, that's pretty impressive, guys.
I think it was Sunset's only Luce Award.
It was. I read that it was the only Luce Award.
Yeah.
But I mean, so amazing project. So tell us about that project. And I know you are a camper, right?
I am a
Yes.
camper. Well, as my sister likes to say, I got the family camping gene, and she didn't. But you can talk to her about her part at the reception. So our grandparents met in their 20s climbing the slopes of Mount Baker in Washington, when their respective mountaineering groups from Portland and Seattle joined up, and their love of the outdoors carried on to our mom and her brother and to me. And so one day a group of Sunset editors was chatting, and how can we make this year's camping coverage be different and even better, because it's just like turkey, the Thanksgiving turkey, you've got to come up with a new thing every year. And they were asking me, how can we help our readers love camping as much as I did? So I came up with the idea to hold a contest to take readers on a camping weekend with Sunset editors. And my cohorts thought that sounded like a great idea. So entries arrived in an avalanche. There were newbies, like the woman who had requested a camp stove for her 50th birthday but had no idea how to use it. There was a Cub Scout den leader who admitted he actually had an aversion to camping. There were what we called the mixed couples, one who loved camping and one who wouldn't go beyond resorts. So a dozen of us on staff, this was a big effort, headed by Peter Fish, our travel editor, joined forces to take 2 lucky families to Big Basin Redwoods, and we were going to teach them all the skills a modern camper needs to know. And I'm trying to remember, did we have like release forms or anything? I mean, it's...
I think we actually did, and the other problem was we had to get a lot of permissions from Big Basin because it was sort of this commercial.
So we went about teaching them the tried and true, like pitching tents, building fires, singing songs, making s'mores, and then there was the cutting edge, how to make camping comfortable and even pretty, how to shake cocktails. Sarah and another editor were in charge of that, how to bake chocolate cake in a Dutch oven, and the recipes all carefully tested by our team back at home, and there were directions that even inexperienced campers could follow. Well, we had a blast, and our May 2015 article, Welcome to Camp Sunset, which was the one that was simply advertised as Camping in Style, it did win the Luce Award, and we went on to create a mini franchise with our book and dozens of online how-to videos and even some events. And it was truly just such a fun and rewarding project.
I love that. Okay, so there is hope for me. I need to get online and look at the videos because I'm one of those like mixed couples. Okay, so now, not only was camping a big thing in Sunset Magazine, the domestication of the outdoors was key as the advent. Well, I mean, not the advent. There was the barbecue all the way from the 1930s, right? So I'd like to turn to you, Jerry. You were started at Sunset in '59. From your perspective, tell us about the role Sunset played in this whole outdoor living concept.
Well, I think you have to go back to the beginning, to the West, because, we were Mexico. And there were grand haciendas, and they had wonderful traditions of, beef in a pit or on a spit or whatever. So out there living was already an established part because they liked the climate. And so when Sunset came along with Larry Lane, what he did recognize was the climate, which is really quite a year-round thing, and the scenic aspects around us. And so Sunset really began as an indoor-outdoor living home. We didn't look. Our outdoors was as much a part of our home as our bedrooms and our bathrooms. And early on, we were doing elaborate outdoor kitchens. I mean, nobody today has topped some of the things I saw from the 30s. And one interesting little point was everybody had a backyard barbecue, especially in Los Angeles, and you had, your built-in incinerator. Well, smog did away with that. So then we turned to the Weber barbecue. We basically, grilling was one of our things, outdoor cooking, but plumb sinks and refrigerators were part of the outdoor. The house was designed with sliding doors so that you could go in and out. Kitchens had fireplaces in them and rotisseries. As I recall, one of the first moves towards separating the oven and the stove was in a store from Sunset in which they created the tabletop cooker and then positioned the oven separately. So we really changed the whole house. That was an experiment out of Sunset. Oh, and a little tidbit, which I don't want to forget. We were big on picnics. And so it wasn't just our backyard, it was every place else we went. Beach picnics, I cannot tell you how many places I've hauled a picnic, including Thanksgiving. We had an editor. We picnicked for everything you can think of. It's a wonder we didn't do Christmas outside. But just the whole idea of enjoying, we worked to integrate our lives with our surroundings. And I think that was probably the core. Have I hit the point?
You have hit the point.
Okay. You can tell me when to quit.
Oh, no. So do you want to talk about the mud ovens? The adobe ovens?
Oh, the commitment of the Sunset Reader, as Elena said, is unbelievable. And I mean, they would get an idea and they would run with it. And one of the things that we made were mud ovens, like they have down on the reservations. One of my more interesting experiences as a writer was there was a wonderful Indian artist in Hopi, Helen Cadera, who did these gorgeous little storyteller things that were down in the Hearst Museum. And one day I'd gone out there with somebody, and she was doing feast day. So we were out there with all these grills over coals and cooking dinner together and what have you, and people were coming, going, and the corn dancing was going on. And she had a mud oven, and so we baked bread in a mud oven. But in Sunset, from the 1930s, I go back, I bet we've done 7 or 8 or 9 directions for making a mud oven. So we made one, I put down that date, but forget what it was. But anyway, so the art director and I went out back and we built a mud oven. And the story was you can build a mud oven in 5 days. Well, turns out an awful lot of people did, but one guy with a Volkswagen said you can't travel that much. You can't get that many bricks in a Volkswagen. So, but people were obsessed with the quality of foods that you could get from an oven in which you built the fire and then raked aside and worked with the residual heat. I found out you can incinerate a turkey in no time at all. And but again, because of this, I have to bring up sourdough because our heart was in sourdough. Starters, I mean, you can go on for several. I mean, the old sourdough of gold mining days, you know, they kept his starter in his jar and his sleeping bag. Well, at any rate, people were fascinated with the crusty breads, which, you know, are part of the West. We were very proud of them. And you could really get magnificent breads out of those ovens. And so I'm not quite sure, and that's what I did when I was with Helen. We baked bread in her mud oven while we were cooking all the stuff on the grill. So the fascination, and then we had another one. Oh, I know, Peter Whiteley and I did one. And as I was telling the girls, the one I did in the garden, they had to take the bulldozer to knock down. But some of the other later ones, I guess, fell apart. You didn't get your mix and mud
We could spend the whole day just
together.
talking about adventures with the Adobe
But
oven.
The many Adobe ovens.
But it's not easy. But the point is making them. But it was a project. One time we did one of the stories we did. We got a whole school made a mud oven, and then they sent back to us their story of what we did. And that is also another aspect of Sunset. You know, our kitchen cabinet, people would say, I made your recipe, but I made these changes. So, and the thing is, kitchen cabinet was such a wonderful vehicle for us because we understood what people were cooking with, what ingredients they would use, and very much influenced how we looked at the markets too. But the mud ovens, they were just pure fun, and you could bake the best pizza. I mean, you could do anything. It was really why people went to all that work. It's because it was worthwhile.
Excellent.
And you know, I'll just say, with our readers, it was almost like call and response. You know, it was this beautiful relationship.
Speaking of that relationship, one thing that I learned a lot about Genevieve Callahan and Lou Richardson and the Lanes is on the weekends. They're from Iowa. This was all new to them. So on the weekends, they'd all get in the car and they'd go exploring, and they would see what what kind of fish people are catching, or what kind of food they're eating. Talk to readers and meet all these people out in the field. And I believe that's also a way to get to know, not only for your own edification to understand the West, but what Western lifestyle is all about. And so, Sarah, I know we had a conversation about that. Can you tell us a little bit about how you see that connection in relation to the stories that you guys were able to put into the magazine?
I do think it builds on everything all of you have just said, in how curious and active and connected to the magazine our readers were. It allowed us to be, or it actually demanded that we be curious too, and get our boots on the ground out there. Oh, that's probably a really bad phrase right now. But
because we pursued readers home. I mean, they didn't come to us. We were out exploring all the time, working
Right.
with experts, gardeners.
and they would come along with us in almost anything we would explore. And we had this luxury of the waves of immigrants that have come to the West Coast. And so we had these pockets of what might have then been exotic ingredients and cooking styles, but we could go find them, bring them and the cooking styles into the kitchen and interpret them for the home cook and get them into houses out there. So from stories that might have been just ingredient driven, like Jerry's Food Guide Monthly, where she might have done just an ingredient introduction, to a full-on introduction to maybe the Hmong farmers in the Central Valley. I think, Linda, you did that once, and their ingredients. Our readers were interested and would come along. But there were also times when maybe when we were more corporate driven in more recent days, when the bean counters would like some more generalist stories, maybe a little less adventurous, and we would always have to do the big best burritos in the West. I think that was you, Elaine. And I think I took best tacos in the West. Yeah.
You know, may I interject also? The other thing is we encourage people to explore ethnic markets. The West was I think socially much more graceful and relaxed than the East, because I would talk to people in New York, and you went to that kind of a market? We found the addresses, we helped you get there, because that's where you found the ingredients to do these things. And so it was really we really were a big cultural blend. And every time, I always say, every time there's a war, then we have a new cuisine. But, after Korea, then all of a sudden we got Korean food. And, Vietnam, and then we got the Vietnamese. And so we would meet these people and just welcome them for what they had to bring to our culture. So we weren't sitting in an office. We were out in the field. And you referred to Jen and Lou. One of my favorite things they did a story once about traveling the West Coast. They got in a car and went from Seattle to Baja. They went to every pancake thing, every church supper, they talked to people, and they set the path for us of talking to the people who live here. So we knew them, and they knew us, and you cannot believe how welcoming people were to Sunset. I mean, I wouldn't trust anybody from a news agency in the world today, but at Sunset, they'd list somebody come right into their house.
Exactly, Jerry. And I was just going to add on even those broad topics, it was always authentic. If we were looking for burritos, tacos, it was shoe leather reporting, and we were looking for the authentic traditions. And I would just throw out one story that it still makes me laugh. In the best tacos in the West, jumped in the Mazda and went out eating tacos. And obviously I cried uncle really fast and started deputizing other people to eat tacos. And so we had to look in the Central Valley, obviously, for good tacos. And I tapped a food writer in the Central Valley, and she wrote up several places. And a little while after that story ran, she was in the line at Costco, and she overheard a family in front of her and realized it was the owners of one of the places she had written up. And she couldn't help herself. She tapped the father on the shoulder and told him who she was, and he just threw his arms around her. And he said, "You don't know how you've changed our lives." They told her that they had doubled their business, they had to take over the space next door, and it goes to the connections again with the readers that we were talking about. And those readers were who you described, generally middle class. His earlier customers weren't our core readers, but we had introduced a whole new group to his business. And then we got an angry letter from someone who had driven 3 hours to go eat at that taqueria. And he was irate that they served tacos on paper plates. And, so he had gone with us, but he wasn't happy.
So you did travel locally in the West and also farther afield. So I'd like to hear from Linda about that China trip.
In the 1980s, a fellow Ledam, Su Young Lee, had produced a beautiful film series on food in China. And
Right after it was open, remember.
yes, and she had encouraged me to do a story on for Sunset on food in China. She shared some of her recipes with me and some of her photos, and I did publish a couple of stories about, I think it was like a Chinese hot pot, and they were, they were very interesting. And she said, I know how to work with the Chinese government. I can tell you the ins and outs and how you can navigate this so you can get permission to interview people and take photos there, because it's tricky. This was not too long after they had recently opened up. So I had always wanted to go to the country of my ancestors, and I knew our readers were interested in Chinese food. There had been a lot of Chinese restaurants opening up and a lot of more different regional cuisines. So I asked my editor, Proctor Malkus, and he thought it was a great idea. And he said, you should send this proposal to the Lanes. So I did do that, and they said yes. I loved it. And then recently I just realized, I was looking through my library at that Bill and Jean Lane had actually gone to China with a group. They were one of the very first groups to go to China when it was first normalized in 1979. So that might have influenced their decision. He might have been interested to see what was happening in China too. So in 1986, we wrote a proposal to the Chinese government, and the Ministry of Commerce said, "Oh, we will arrange your trip." So in I think it was May of '87, my photographer and I went. We spent 15 days. We went to Beijing, Shanghai, Hangzhou, Chengdu, and Guangzhou. And we visited private homes. That was a big element of my scouting, because I knew that was very important for a Sunset store. We had to get into people's homes. And we also went to restaurants. And we went shopping with them. We ate in their kitchens. And we just ate and ate and ate. According to my notes, we ate over 300 dishes. I was starting to number each dish we ate because we had so much food. And the people were amazing. They could do so much with so little. I remember in an apartment in Beijing, they had a kitchen that was the size of a bedroom closet for us. And all the cooking kind of took place on the floor. There were 2 burners on the floor, a sink, and a chopping board. Because, you know, a lot of them was squatting when they did their work. They didn't really stand up. And the husband cooked like 6 dishes in rapid succession. He just stacked them on top of each other, and then we ate. And then in the countryside, it was a little different. It was sort of a 2-person affair to cook a dish, because the wife might be cooking in a big wok over a fire, and on the other side, her husband was feeding the fire with bamboo and straw to get enough heat to get the dish done. But the food was delicious. It was simple, but it was very wholesome. And I took all those ideas with me, and I brought them back, and I translated them into recipes that our readers could do. You know, I chose, and actually, you know, a lot of the Chinese food that was eaten in the homes was very simple, like what home cooks in the U.S. would do. We don't tend to do really complicated stuff. So the home recipes tended to be very simple. If there was a really exotic ingredient, I would try to give a alternative. And we did have a lot of, Asian markets here where you could get it. So you had your choice. You could do it either the completely authentic way, or you could do the supermarket version. But I did a big story in April of 1988. And after that story was published, I found out from the Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C., that we were the first magazine, Western magazine, that was permitted to do extensive visits in private homes. And then afterwards, they used the same itinerary that we had started for other magazines that came afterwards. And also, our sales department used that story quite often for some of their special events as sales promotions. So yeah, that was one of the really fantastic trips that we learned. And actually, the next year, the editor asked me if I wanted to go to Italy and do a similar trip. I said yes.
Thanks, Linda. Okay, so let's talk about wine.
Yes.
Wine is very important in the West, but especially here in California. And there's been a lot, Sunset kind of treated wine a little differently. But before we talk about that, I want to talk about what was going on in the California wine industry in the 1970s. And who better to talk about that is Jerry. What was happening at Sunset and wine reporting in the 1970s when the wine industry in California was really coming up to speed?
Well, can I start a little bit further back?
Of course you can.
Okay, well, first of all, we went through Prohibition, So in 1934, the California Wine Institute was evolved, which is sort of a political body to protect. And most of the wineries, I think, were required to join and contribute to kind of protect their backside, so to speak. And when Larry Lane bought the magazine in 1928, and his Family View, he refused hard alcohol and cigarettes and beer as advertising, but he accepted wine because that was a meal. That was part of your meal. And I looked back in the old issues, and I mean, we always had to use vinegar and water as an alternative for wine in recipes. But nonetheless, we did use wine all of those years as a recipe ingredient. We didn't talk much about varietal. Then our first really major story was in the year I started work, back in 1959. We had two editors who were knew a lot about wine, and we did a story on Northern California wineries. There were 40 wineries. Wow. A few still exist. And I remember going up in the hills and tasting with them, Louis Martini, all these old guys. I mean, these were legends. And then, but it was all about what wine was, how it was made, what it was all about, what the varietals were and what have you. We also approached wine through travel primarily as a destination point, going to a winery, a trip, bicycling through the winery country, all this kind of stuff. But we really never did much focusing on wine until 1970. And that's when we did this big story on tasting wines. And again, all these legends, Bob Mondavi, Louis Martini, Joe Heights, all these guys. At that time, I think I counted there were not quite 100 wineries. In 1970. Do you know today that there are between 4,000 and 5,000 wineries in California? Talk about a trend. So our whole approach in that story was, what do you look for when you're tasting wine? What are the varietals? I forgot, in the 1959 story, there was a big thing about the cost of wine, what you should expect to pay. The range was from about $1.35 to $2.50. And I remember when the Wine Institute and all of these people were having a big argument whether you could possibly sell a Cabernet for more than $2.50. And Joe Heights was this one said, the hell with it. I make good wine. I'm not taking that kind of pennies. And then that was the beginning of, Joe was the first one to break the price range. And when you look at those old stories with the wine grapes that were being grown, well, Chardonnay, the principal grapes are still there. So many of the grapes have disappeared. So many of the kind of individual qualities that were into wine, like I missed the Grignolet Rosé. That was so good. Am I on the point, Jennifer?
Totally on the point.
I tend to wonder, I'm an old lady, And but wine was always so integrated, and then we started doing wine storage in the house, and then we grew your own wine grapes, and then we how to make wine even before your time. We did how to make your own wine. So it wasn't just drinking wine. It was the fact that wine was part of your life, and it was part of the West. And so again, that's the whole essence of Sunset, was the integration of living and what you were living with. I think that was the greatest strength of the magazine. You felt it was your door to new experiences, to good experiences.
Yeah, and I would say, Sunset was a guide to how to live in the West, but really through living in the West, you realized how lucky you were to live in the West. Yeah. And that rush of gratitude for being shown how to live in the West, and then you show others.
To take advantage of where you were, to open your door and to take advantage, you were here, you wanted it.
We were like the friendly neighbor for the ones who had just moved west.
Nice.
Anyway.
Sara, can you expand on that? the way that wine was treated in Sunset Magazine was different from a lot of the other publications that were out there talking about wine.
Okay, well, first of all, my publisher, Bill Lane, felt giving the name of the wine brand with a wine was giving him a free ad. So we talked about white wine and Chardonnay, so we never gave him wine brand. And then in 1994, I think, when they started me doing this food, what was it called? Food guide, yeah, a column. Then we added a wine column that went with it. And Bob Thompson, who is a legend in the wine business, an old buddy, and used to work for Sunset, did our first Sunset, because we also had books about wine travel. But he could name the name of the winery, so you know what the heck to go on by. And, but it was always treated as just, every day. I mean, there was some special, and he would talk about, if you're going to have a barbecue, you'd have this, but if you really want the high end, this is that. And so in 1994, we actually gave you real instructions on how to buy wine, and we had never done that before.
Thank you. Sarah, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, from that was a great introduction, Jerry, to what was going on. In fact, through the 60s, most of what people were drinking wasn't Cabernet or Pinot Noir. It was big red blends in jugs, basically, hardy reds. And so it wasn't until the 70s that the industry really woke up to individual varieties and done with balance. And it took us a long time to wake up from Prohibition. But the period you're describing, Jerry, in the 70s and then into the 80s, is when wine writing got into critiquing as opposed to a lifestyle that Sunset had always treated wine as a lifestyle, as part of your lifestyle, and as part of the how-to and living in the West. And by the time I came along, I joined the magazine in '95 and edited a lot of that freelance wine writing. And we were starting to recommend wines and describe wines. But the other magazines that were in the wine space were the Wine Spectator by then, Robert Parker's Wine Advocate, and the Wine Enthusiast. They were solely in the business of critiquing wines, and very exclusively. And I knew these writers, and some of them were great friends, but this is not what we did as Sunset. And when I finally moved from food into being our wine editor, I think I did it a little hesitantly, or maybe I wanted to apologize to the wine industry a little bit for being Sunset's wine editor. But I got over that really quickly because we did a lot of research through those years, and it was truly interesting. One number that still sticks in my mind is that we found out that Sunset readers, and this is food, travel, garden, all of them, drank 6 million glasses of wine a week. And I thought, you know what? I don't have to apologize for being a wine editor. I realized that this was the audience that the wine industry really wanted. It was the other magazines, it was an honor to be in and to be named in their top 100 and that sort of thing. But our readers were the ones really drinking a ton of wine. And we also realized that 6 million was probably seriously underreported, because who's honest about how much wine you drink in a week? So we went into it boldly in programs that would sort out good wines for these people, in a wine club, wine competition where we could go through a ton of wine. But it was, and again, it was hands-on, but it was also lifestyle driven. We did food and wine pairings constantly. We put, and that was not on paper. That was in the test kitchen, the wines with the food.
And you gave recipes with them, right?
We gave recipes in our wine club. We gave recipes with the wines, and it was teamwork. Actually, the team actually grew bigger and bigger as it got more and more fun. I would pick maybe 6 recipes on paper to go with each wine, and the retesters would cook the recipes. And it turned out we would have about 20 people from down the hall would come and rate the pairings, they almost always were right. Sometimes I overrode the decision, but
And then we'd all have to take a long nap.
but yeah, but it was hands-on lifestyle. This is what will fit in with your Friday menu. You know, it was also not very seldom could I write about wines that cost $75 to $150 a bottle. It was real wines for real people. I was constantly being asked for the value columns, best wines for under $15 in every category. And I realize it's not very hard to find good $80 a bottle wines. It's just not. It's a little harder to find the under $15 bottles, so I kissed a lot of frogs to find, but it was really satisfying when you do find them. So again, our wine coverage was like our other coverage. It was real lifestyle coverage that we expected those 6 million glasses to be as part of their life.
Great, thank you.
I want to stick one thing in. All of this came along after my time, and I want to tell you, Sara is a remarkable editor. She is the first editor who provided a revenue in from the editorial department because the wine club was so popular. I cannot tell you how many people complained when they could no longer get the wines that Sara had selected because of the value and the quality and how they went with the food.
Oh, thank you, Jerry.
So I know we're running a little late. I wanted to do one quick lightning round before we go to our questions. So when I started working on this project, I had a meeting with each one of them to get to know them and understand what they liked about being at Sunset. And all of you said that it was your dream job. You know, Linda describes it as when she was accepted to Sunset. You know, everyone really loved their job. Really quick, I'd like each of you, and Jerry, you're going last. Each of you just, you're going to go last. She's going to end everything. Can you think of a memory about being mentored at Sunset? Because like Dom's is very much about mentorship and education. And so I'd like to hear about a memory of being mentored at Sunset. You want to go first, Margo?
Sure. Well, I mean, for me, it's really a collection of experiences, and I would have to say, for me, it's definitely Jerry at Sunset, because it's not so much any one single thing that you've done, it's that you have set such an example for how to embrace food with such gusto and flair, but with real practicality too, and rigor. And that's a hard combination, you know, and I've just always so enjoyed from the moment I first got to meet you in person when you came through the door of the kitchen at Sunset after you'd left, and but you came through and it was still clearly your world. You came through like this. And you were looking around and just I could tell that you were checking out the setup, like, was it still the same? And I had just gotten there and I was like so in awe. You know? And I had managed to burn the leg of lamb. And there were other mishaps, but you were so gracious about it, and it's just I've just really enjoyed learning so much from you, Jerry. Just how to be in food, the joy, but also the dedication. And you know, that is a kind of a hard thing these days. We worry about food a lot now. We worry about plastics in food. We worry about the pesticides. We worry about the climate. You know, there was a time when food was joy. It was about community and connection and getting into your garden and understanding where you lived. And all of that was, you know, Jerry and Linda brought that to us and we tried to carry it on.
I got out at the right time.
But it still can be. It's just a little harder for us now.
Linda, what about you?
Well, obviously Jerry was the greatest mentor of all. I think for me and for everyone else, I call her our mother hen. She would gather her little chickadees or the food department around her, and she would, you know, educate us, nurture us, support us, and she would push us out there to, you know, do something more. She would always volunteer us to do things that we didn't even know we were volunteered for. Oh, she'd say, oh, you know, you're going to give a talk to so-and-so on over there, or you're going to this lunch to meet so-and-so. She would always, you know, make us grow. So she was wonderful in that way. And then we also had a lot of fun. She would do like food scouting trips for us. We had fantastic ones to Seattle, to LA. There was a lot of drinking and a lot of eating. But
And some napping.
yeah, oh yes. Yeah, and a few of us got sick too, but there was just a lot of fun. But yeah, Jerry is the best mentor of all. And also she helped me negotiate a very nice raise when Time Warner took us over. She coached me on how to do that.
Excellent. Elaine, what
I
about
told
you?
her to ask him what she was worth to keep instead of to throw out. Turned out it was quite a lot.
Well, I mean, I sort of feel like I was mentored by all the Sunset women on this panel and some, you know, who are in our group of extended friends who aren't on the panel. But just a couple of quick notes. Jerry, you really encouraged me so much to just follow where my curiosity took me, take on some big projects, and you just trusted me to go for it, and that meant so much to me. I wouldn't have known I could have done all those projects if you hadn't trusted me to do them. And Margo, you brought so much experience from outside Sunset that helped me think beyond that trusty home economics mindset. I learned so much from your example of, you know, deep storytelling and different ways to shape stories and package them. And then I felt like you were a fabulous collaborator on projects we got to do together. And then you were really my comrade when the Sunset Test Kitchen ship went down. So, you know, there's a lot of different ways to mentor people, and I think friendship is very important. And I think of all these women as wonderful friends.
Sarah?
I'm going to go with Jerry. And for the reason that this conversation has been all about, I did not grow up with Sunset on the coffee table. And in fact, I grew up all over the country, not just in the West. And when I moved into the food department and worked with Jerry as an editor, she helped shape my knowing and feeling about Sunset as in this legacy, about the connection we had to our readers, about the respect we had, the part of living in the West that we owned. And thank you, Jerry, for that.
And Jerry, what about you?
Well, first of all, we had an incredible editor. And it's an editor who, no matter how silly your idea was, never said no. He let you talk yourself to sense. And you know, that was the whole thing. To never feel fettered by him and to feel encouraged. And it was sort of like he just let you open up. And I basically did anything I wanted for 42 years. Who can resist that as a way to live? But that also stemmed from, do you want me to talk about the Lane family now?
Sure.
I cannot say enough to praise the integrity of the Lane family that owned the magazine. Larry Lane I actually knew Jen and Lou too. It's one good thing about age. But anyway, Larry Lane was a true visionary. I mean, he really did see the future. And his wife, Ruth, whom was also a very good friend, tough lady, was also managing editor. The things that they did during the Second War, I mean, we saved everything, from peanut butter to, bacon fat and tinfoil. But they were so with the time, and they so understood the times, and they had good people. They had the most amazing, we have all made, my life friendships are Sunset, because the people they hired were wonderful people. And their commitment to serving the reader and being responsible to the reader and being responsible to the environment and being responsible to the times, you just don't find that many people who are that willing to, shall we say, put the money where your mouth is. And I think one of the more notable one is when we did a story and we blew the whistle in DDT. We said, we can see the birds are dying, they're not hatching. It's not all wrong. Do not use DDT. We had lost a lot of advertising, but we were right. And also we were early on in organic gardening, and so their sense of responsibility to keeping the land well and the people well, I mean, they really were remarkable. I mean, the last of the family, there was Larry and Ruth, the mother and father, and then Bill and Jean. Bill was our publisher, and Mel, his brother, and his wife, Joan. Bill, and he ran the book division, because we had tons of books, too. And Joan just died two or 3 weeks ago. So the last of that whole family is gone. The kids didn't take over because they couldn't pay enough money. They sold Sunset to Time Warner for $278 million. That was a long time ago. But the people who keep trying, Time Warner tried, but I'm sorry, they were in New York. They still believe what the New Yorker cover is. There's New York and there's a Golden Gate Bridge across there. So they didn't understand what to do. But these women survived under that and kept the magazine going with full integrity until it got bought by a small group that makes it look like Sunset, but it's not their fault publications have gone down the tube. It's the end of a time and an end of a period. Yeah. So the Lane family, I praise them for giving us a wonderful world.
Yeah. Well, thank you all very much for telling us all those great stories. Thank you very much for telling all those wonderful stories. Carrie would like us to experience some of the Sunset tidbits. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time for questions and answers, but I'm sure anybody would be happy to answer any questions out in our reception area. Thank you.
I think I'm going to get emotional. So true. Oh.